I have 30 minutes or so to talk to you about what I believe about relational practice. But first, in the nature of hedgehogs, I'd like to say, if you don't recognize a hedgehog, this is one here, and you're welcome to introduce yourself to Hedgie the hedgehog from Nova Scotia anytime you want. So one hedgehog can recognize another. The power of relational practice. And I've subtitled this, The Power of a Relational Moment, because I believe that moments are what build relationships. And I'll talk about that a little bit as I go along. Larry Brentro, who is one of the authors of The Circle of Courage, says that many of the children with whom we work warrant or suffer from the diagnosis of disconnection. While they may have friends who use them or abuse them, while they may have different forms of relationships with others, his argument is that they're disconnected from important and meaningful relationships in their lives. They are disconnected from significant others. They're disconnected from leaders or mentors or the people who count in our lives. And before I talk about relational practice, I want to acknowledge that in some ways, perhaps, we've contributed to the disconnection of the children with whom we work. In the way that we historically defined relationship-based practice, or the way in which we define the importance of relationship in our work with young people. Here's a quote again from the same Larry Brentro, who talks today about how children suffer from the diagnosis of disconnection. But here's a quote back from 1969, which was one of the most common, at least in North America, ways of thinking about relationships with young people in care. The relationship places the child in a vulnerable position. He can be readily influenced for better or for worse. And he went on to say, it's not enough for the worker to establish a relationship with the child, but he must see to it that he uses the relationship. Notice the implications in here. You know, the worker establishes the relationship. The worker uses the relationship with the young person. It's the young person who was seen as vulnerable. Notice the positioning around how we defined relationship-based work. Excuse me. Henry Meyer, in 1987, in talking about how we had conceived relationships and relationship-based work or relationship-led work, talked about how the making of connections and forming a bond was seen in the hands of the worker with regard to the resident. It was a one-way street. The worker established the relationship. The worker used the relationship. And in the literature of the times back then, we even heard constant reference to the notion that the relationship was a tool to be used in helping to change the behavior of a young person. It was, in fact, in many ways conceived of as a form of social control or manipulation. If you want, a human-based behavioral intervention. I had a relationship with you, and I used it. And it showed up in the everyday language of our field, how people thought about relationship. They talked about things like, well, you've all heard these. I have a good relationship with the children, which means they like me, or they don't give me a hard time when I go to work, or they do what I ask them to do. Those were typical definitions of good relationships with young people some time ago. And we were encouraged in many ways to position ourselves on the outside, doing to a young person, as opposed to in connectedness, doing with a young person. And thus, in some ways, I would argue, we contributed to this idea of the disconnection of young people. And yet, we know that connections are important. We know that relationships are formed on connection. I'm an older guy, so I have lots of doctors. And I want to talk about two especially. I have this one doctor that I see frequently, and I go in to see him, and he goes, oh, Dr. Garfat, how are you today? What can I do for you? This is an everyday practitioner. I have another doctor who uses cameras, and if those of you who are guys or older, you know what you use the cameras for. It's a very intimate examination of your internal self. And I go in to see this guy, and I'm anxious because of what's about to happen, even though it's happened before. And I'm anxious about what's about to happen. And he walks in the room with his assistant, Carlos, and he says, hi, Tom, how you doing? And I go, like, I'm really nervous. He says, oh, me and Carlos, we feel just great. He takes his needle and squirts it in the air. And he says, in a minute or two, you're going to feel as good as us. And he shakes my hand again, and he says, see you when it's over. See the difference in these two encounters I have. And you know what happens after, my doctor comes in with his assistant and tells me I'm going to feel good in a couple of minutes. All of a sudden, I relax. I feel a little bit better. I feel like I'm with another human being who understands what's going on, as opposed to being with the other doctor who has this kind of distant, if you want, approach, write him a name on a piece of paper that he doesn't hardly even remember from time to time. Connections are not relationships. You're right, Morris, this thing goes backwards and jumps all over the place. Connections are not relationships, but we know this. We are born to connect. It's who we are. It's hardwired into us. It's built into our very being. We are born to connect. And I like to also think that you have to connect to be born. This is how fundamental the notion of connection is. You are, as a living human being, the result of a connection. That started your life. Without that connection, you would have no life. So on a basic biological level, connections are actually the foundation of life itself. This is a picture of neural growth cones. Look at the one reaching out. Reaching out, searching to make a connection, to build a synaptic connection in your brain. It's fundamental, and under the right conditions and at the right moment, it actually makes that connection. Well, why is this important? Because children make connections all the time. Young people make connections all the time, as do we. There's this thing that we like to call the association of experiences. Donald Hebb, years ago, wrote about this idea that cells that fire together wire together. In other words, if two things occur at approximately the same time, although there needs to be a split millisecond of difference between them, they don't occur at exactly the same moment. But we say cells that fire together wire together. Two experiences that happen at the same time become associated. Bruce Perry likes to talk about, here's how you learned the word dog. A dog walked by. Somebody said, that's a dog. Another dog walked by, and somebody said, that's a dog. And then another dog, a different kind of dog perhaps, walked by, and somebody said, that's a dog. And after a while, after this had happened enough, all of a sudden, click, the visual image becomes attached to the word. And I'm going to prove it to you right now. Think about a dog. You see, I didn't tell you what dog to see, but you saw one. You can bring a dog up in your head when I say, think about a dog, because you have built a neural connection. Why is this important? Because here's the experience many of our young people have had. Adult pain, adult pain, adult pain, adult pain. Click. And now all of a sudden, you walk into the room, the nicest person in the universe, and you just want to be helpful. And the young person goes, I don't want anything to do with you, and pushes you away as if you're some threat. Because in fact, you are a threat. because of this neural link that's occurred. Here's what we want to happen for young people. Adult, whatever, adult safety, adult something positive, adult safety, adult safety, adult safety, click. So that young people who are disconnected, who fear connections with others, come to eventually associate that not all adults are the source of pain. You'll never undo that initial neural connection, of course, but as the brain people like to tell us, with time, you can help build new neural pathways that will become preferred or override the old pathways. If you have any doubt, look at this young woman. What is she doing? Now, depending on how you interpreted it, she might be waving, she might be saying hello, she might be saying goodbye, whatever it happens to be. But you see an image and you give it meaning based on your previous experiences and how you've learned to interpret things. And, excuse me, if we work with young people to create alternative templates, they will have different experiences in the future. So connections are important. Why are connections important? Well, when you feel connected, you feel less alone, less isolated, less alienated. You feel like you're not the only person in the universe. When you feel connections and make them, it helps you to believe that somebody cares about you. Think of all the young people that you've worked with who really don't believe that anybody really cares about them. You know, they might think that you have to care about them, but the number of young people who don't experience themselves as being cared for, being worthy, being valued. As Charlie said, sometimes just being there for someone brings hope when everything else seems hopeless. A moment of connectedness with another person can actually give you a reason to live. If you talk about people, or talk with people who often thought about killing themselves and didn't, they often talk about a connection with another person, and that somehow out of that they might have found some little hope that their life could be worth a little bit more. Brief, caring connections create this momentary context of safety for a young person. In this one moment when you and I are connected and I'm not hurting you, you have this experience of, for a brief moment, feeling safe in the world. Now think of all the things I just said about why it's a good idea. Think of how many of the kids that we work with who feel isolated, rejected, alienated, alone, uncared for, and unsafe. Brief moments of connectedness with another person can help to change all of that. Connected together in caring. Carla was 16 years old when she said this. A child care worker, a psychoeducateur actually, intervened with her in a small moment, a tiny little moment. She was one of the young women I interviewed when I was doing my dissertation research into interventions that changed young people's lives. And she talks about this one moment when this man reached out to her and connected with her. And what she says is, it changed my life. I really didn't think anybody cared until then. How profound a single moment can be. Relational practice is built on connections that occur in the moment. Well, here's some things that people have said about relational practice and some words they've used to describe it, or some phrases. As we've moved away from this old notion some 40 or 50 years ago of relationship as a tool, rather to think about relational practice. One of the ways it gets defined is that it's focused on a growth in connection. That there is a connection between two people, and the focus of relational practice is on that connection and the growth or the development of that connection. Relational practice gives preeminence to interactions as the locus of human growth and development. Relational practice says this is where growth occurs. As Jerry Fuster likes to say, we only live and grow in relationships. That it is the central point, the focal point, the context, the container. It focuses on providing an environment where young people, where people in general can understand and reconnect with themselves through trusting and safe relationships. It highlights the role of language in shaping experience, how you say, what things mean. It focuses on a balance of power between self and other. You are no longer the power base in this relationship just because you happen to have the title of worker. Rather, there's more of a balance of power where we work together to decide on what we will do and what we will work on and what will be important. And it involves connecting beyond the behavior. For so many years, our focus was simply on being outside, using the relationship to focus on changing the behavior, period. Now, we're more concerned with the whole person, beyond the behavior. What needs are being met by the behavior, for example. It is, as Mark Kruger has said, a way of being with youth in the lived experience of the moment. Being with, not standing outside doing to, but being with in this relational place. And he says that our goal in relational practice is to create as many moments of empowerment, connection, discovery with ourselves, with each other, between us, for you, for me, for the young person, for us together. And so we say that relational practice involves experiencing meaningful moments in the interpersonal in-between, between us. The interpersonal in-between, between us, that is co-created by us together. The space, if you want, that exists. Relationships are no longer considered something done to young people, but rather something that emerges in the context of the interactions between them, built on the moments of those interactions between them. The in-between between us is this space, this place. It's no longer a tool, but it's a place. This space that exists between you and I in the context of our relationship. And we define it differently. We used to talk about relationships in ways like, he's the teacher and I'm the student. She's my aunt. Notice how I'm talking about roles in this case. And now when we talk about relational practice, we talk about things like, is this relationship a place of safety? Is it a place where we learn? Is it a place where we're vulnerable? Both of us are participants to this moment. Both of us engage in a vulnerable way in the context of this moment and co-create it together. And that is the focus as we deepen our connections. Meaningful moments that occur between self and other can have these kinds of impacts. It can change your experience of yourself. It can help create a different way of thinking about who you are. You know that many of the young people that we work with think about themselves like this: I am worthless. I am of no value. I am a problem. And we want to help them have a different experience of themselves. I am valuable. I am worthwhile. I am of significance. Relational moments can change your life forever and can help you overcome the fear of connection. I don't know, I pushed the button. It involves, as Francis Ricks said, long time ago, it involves, as Francis Ricks said, an intense focus on self and active self-awareness. Our old approach to relationship-based practice didn't worry about who you were or how you were, other than whether or not your actions could control the behavior of others. Now what we say is that who you are is as important as anything that you do. And it's your responsibility as a worker to bring, as Jerry Fuster said, your unadorned self, your vulnerable self, your open, authentic, real self to this encounter with another person who has, up until now, in many cases, simply experienced relationships as a distant vehicle of control done by adults who have authority. It involves us being fully present, as Mark Kruger said, being fully present in the moment of the encounter. Being there begins with me. If I am not here, present, then how can I ever hope that you will engage with me? Because I am not a real person in that moment. Active self-awareness means that we pay attention to the body and the mind, to what we think, to what we do, to what we feel, noticing what's going on for you right now at this moment. Because if you don't notice what's going on for you in this moment, how you will ever distinguish what's you and what's other? The two become confused for us often. I have to notice me in the moments of the encounter with others. So it's also important. Connecting is the foundation of life. Connections are the foundation of relationships. We focus on creating meaningful moments. And yet, we wonder, why is it that so many of the kids that we work with don't really want to engage in connections with us, don't really want to engage in relationships with us? And maybe this young woman summed it up. To anyone who reads this, heed my warning plea, don't trust anyone. Only then can you be free. Don't trust anyone. Based on my previous experience, I know it's not safe to trust other people, especially adults who say they care. Jim Anglin at the University of Victoria talked about this thing called pain-based behavior, that the behavior that we see in young people that is troubling to us is a presentation, a representation, a way of dealing with the pain that they experience. He did the survey of all these group homes in British Columbia, 10 of them, I think. He interviewed all the young people and all the staff. And none of the staff mentioned the word pain, except perhaps to say that this child was a pain in the whatever. And over 95% of the children talked about their pain in one way or another. The children knew about their pain, but the staff didn't notice or didn't think about children in terms of their pain. Rather, the staff thought about children in terms of their behavior. You look at a young person like this, and you wonder what pain lies underneath that. Present and previous pain show up in this moment. We won't bother to read the long poem. It is about pain. It's about the history of having painful experiences, carrying them with you, and bringing them into the present moment. Traumatized children, their pain is present with them in all our interactions with them, but we don't think about young people in terms of pain. We tend to think of them more in other ways. There's this fear that a young person carries. Many, I'm going to even say most of the young people that we work with when we first encounter them have this fear. If I let you in, you will hurt me. Everybody else I've ever let in my life has hurt me. If I let you in, you will hurt me. So when you come along and say you want to connect with me, we're met with this or this, a pushing away or a hiding, a withdrawing from connection with us out of fear that you too will just be another person who will hurt me. So where does that take us? It takes us to say that if we're going to work with young people who are traumatized and living in pain, then somehow we have to be with them in a way that's different, perhaps, than other people have been with them up to this point. We have to create a context of safety where young people can actually allow themselves for a moment to feel vulnerable. As Jerry Fuster said, talking about young people and their pain, he says, there is the self that longs for connection but hides in fear. Your inner self longs for connection but hides in fear. So what can we do? Connections are important. Connections are foundation to healing. Kids are afraid of connections. They're afraid of us. What can we do? Here's a few things that we might do. And to start with, I just want to talk about the amygdala a little bit. And I don't want to wear it to death because it seems like almost everybody knows about the amygdala these days, you know. And if you don't, let me guide you through a brief moment. Please take your fingers and put them like this. As you say the word amygdala with me, I want you to point here. Are you ready? Amygdala. Right there. Two small pieces of your brain. Almond-shaped, tiny little things. Let's do that again. Amygdala. All right, one more time. Amygdala. Foolish as it may seem, you know what you're doing? You're building a new neural connection. Where is your amygdala? Right there, isn't it, eh? Hey, everybody, what's here? The amygdala. See, in simple ways, we build simple connections. We're actually creating a little neural pathway when we do this, but that's beside the point in a way. You see, the amygdala is kind of like the sentry, your sentry, looking out, looking, is this a safe person? Is this a safe situation? Good or bad? Safe or not safe? Constantly on guard? Heck, our amygdala acts on us all the time and we don't even notice it. So you're walking down the street. You decide to cross to the other side of the street. You go to step off the curb, and the next thing you know, you're back up on the sidewalk, your heart's beating really fast, you're breathing hard, you know, your muscles are tight, and a big truck passes right in front of your face. You see, you didn't have time to, as you're stepping off the curb, look right and say, well, damn, that's a pretty big truck coming towards me right now. I think if I don't move back, it'll run me over, because by then you'd be flat. No, but your amygdala works for you. And it's very basic. It probably said something to the rest of your body like, danger, move, because it acts in like a hundredth of a millisecond. It's that quick. Looking out, watching friend or foe. So here I am, a 50-year-old guy, 60-year-old guy, or in my case, even older. Nicest guy in town. I walk into the room. Here's this young boy who's been abused by the nicest guy in town, right? Who happens to be my age, you know, maybe looks a little like me even. And I walk in the room, and his amygdala is on constant alert, looking out, friend or foe, safe or not safe. One look at me, and the amygdala starts to flash. This is fear-based response. This is a very basic human, physiological, neurological response. It responds to you, the amygdala, and gives us either the fight or the flight or sometimes the freeze response. This is my one tip of the day. Now I have 10 minutes left and I'm never going to make it through all my stuff. So let me tell you my one tip of the day. Kids want to connect with you. The self wanting to connect, but being afraid. And they reach out to connect with you all the time. It's just that sometimes we don't notice it. The Seattle Marriage Clinic in Seattle, Washington, claims that they can predict the success or failure of your current relationship by watching 15 minutes of you and your partner interact. And you know what's scary? They can do it with 98% accuracy. And this is all they look at. So imagine, I'm away from home for a couple of weeks. I'm about to go home. I walk in the front door and Sylviane, the woman I live with, who agreed to marry me last year, Sylviane calls out as I walk in the house, "Hey, I've got dinner ready." It's a bid to connect. I have to respond. So I say, "I hope it's not the same crap you made last time I was away." Well, when I come back from the hospital, you know. Or I say, "That's wonderful. I'm looking forward to sitting down and reconnecting." Or I do nothing, I just go walk the dog. You see, I can respond positively, you know, looking forward to reconnecting. I can respond negatively, "Oh, not the same crap you made last time," or I can respond neutrally. And all the Seattle Marriage Clinic does, this is all they do. They count the number of times there is a positive or negative response to a bid from your partner. And based on that, they just add it up. And if you got more negative responses, 98% of the time, it might be 98.9 or something, but 98% of the time, they can predict with accuracy the success or failure of your relationship. Now, bids are everywhere. Kids make bids all the time. People make bids all the time. I'm walking down the street the other day. This guy goes by, pushing his kid in a cart, you know, a little, whatever you call it, carriage, little type. I go by, this is what the kid does. Right? Just reaching out to connect from the very beginning. You go to the store, somebody says, "Hi, can I help you?" This little bid to connect. But we don't always recognize what kids do. I mean, it happens all the time. How many times have you and I connected since I started talking here? Right? Lots. How many times did we connect this morning and now? You know, just little reaching out, little moments. And sometimes they look a little bit strange, you know? Like, we don't recognize them. But they occur in the blink of an eye. Just a little connection. I want to tell this story. So, this is Heather Maudlin from Newfoundland and Labrador. Heather and I were doing this tour one time of residential centers for difficult children, young people. And we were at this place that had the most difficult young people in the country. The most dangerous young people in the country resided in this residential center. And they were dangerous. They were, you know, killers, muggists, rapists, you know, people who had done that kind of thing. And as we're walking around, Heather and I were getting a tour, and as we're walking around, the woman who's giving us a tour says, "Now, you have to be careful. These are really dangerous children." So we had to take off our belts and our, everything that could be dangerous. We walk into this residential facility, excuse me, and down the corridor come these two boys. I swear, 6'4", big like this, tattoos on their arms. You could literally see the chains dripping as if they still had their biker jackets on, you know. And I'm thinking, "Whoa, yeah, maybe she was right. These are troubled kids." So we walk into the classroom where there's these two boys, about the same size. Two boys surrounded by, I swear it was 120 staff. It wasn't really, but it just looked like a whole bunch of staff in the room to me. People trying to be safe, I guess. And so these two boys are sitting there, and this woman introduces us. This is Heather. She comes from Newfoundland, and that's in Canada, where they do a lot of fishing. And this is Tom. He comes from Quebec, where they speak French. This one boy looks at me. He says, How do they say fuck off in French? I'm thinking the kid is brilliant. He just told me to fuck off, but he did it in the context of an educational inquiry in an educational environment that showed cultural sensitivity and an interest in me as a person, as well as my culture. I thought the kid is brilliant. I look at him. I say, they don't. He says, why not? I say, because it's an English expression and they all speak French. Now come over in the corner and I'll tell you how to say fuck off in French. Well, that was a bid to connect. Like it or not, if that kid didn't want anything to do with me, he wouldn't have said a word. I would have walked in the room and he would have done nothing. So I'm here to tell you today, in my last minute or two, that the next time you walk in one of those programs of yours, and that kid says, oh fuck, not you again. I want you to look that kid square in the eye, and I want you to say, yes it is. It's your lucky day. What can we do together that'll make it even better? Because you see, that's part of what relational practice is. It's like concerning ourselves with what we're creating between us at any given moment. And if I walk in the room and you go, oh no, not you again, because I won't say that word again, oh no, not you again, and I go like, that's not appropriate. See what I did? I just created threat here. I created a place of unsafety, right? If I say, you shouldn't be talking like that, I create unsafety once again. I reinforce all this stuff that this kid has been experiencing for all these years. If instead I say, yes it is and it's your lucky day, then maybe for a moment we laugh together. Or maybe for a moment she experiences something different than she experienced before. And maybe for a moment this place, in spite of her push, is a little bit safer than she expected it to be. And in many ways, that's what relational practice is about. It's about creating moments of connectedness that create places of safety so that the in-between between us becomes a place of growth, where our connection as human beings can grow together, where you and I in some ways can have an intimate relationship that's about us, where you feel safe with me and I feel safe with you, and then perhaps you'd be willing to let me be of some assistance to you. But otherwise, I'm just going to sit on the outside and do it to you the way we've done for so many years. Morris, I'm finished. You told me to quit at 3. Thank you for your time.